Welcome to all of you. I'm Brooks Compton, Mayor of the City of Centerville, and very fortunate to have all of you here today for a great seminar. Mike, I've known Mike for a number of years, and he was telling me he's been here 41 years at Siebenthalers, and looking forward to another 9 years before you retire, I think was what he said. But thanks again for all of you for being here. The Centerville City Beautiful Commission does an outstanding job every year. Great events during the course of the year, make our city much, much better looking, and Sue and your committee do a great job, and I know that you're going to introduce them in just a minute, but I did want to introduce a couple members here today. Our Deputy Mayor, Joanne Rao, is right there. Joanne is she's the liaison with the City Beautiful Commission, and Laura Felicetta. Laura, right there, she's the events coordinator for the City of Centerville. So thank you both for being here today. The City of Centerville appreciates the great support we get from the community for all of our commissions, all of the events that we have. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to be a member of any of the commissions that we have here at the City of Centerville, talk to Joanne, Sue, Laura, any of us here, any of the commission members for City Beautiful Commission or other committees, we'd love to have you. So thanks for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to the great chairman of the City Beautiful Commission, Sue Jessie.
Good morning, and welcome to the Centerville City Beautiful Commission Spring Gardening Seminar. Today our topic will be low maintenance perennials and shrubs for spring planting. I'm Sue Jessie, Chair of the City Beautiful Commission, and I would like to recognize our hardworking members. If you could please stand or wave when I call your name. Sherry Lighty, they're all over there. Mary Ann Cable, Jan Prettyman, Carol Adams, Joe Persetti, who's with Public Works, but I don't believe he's here today. Bob Baldino. Krista Korpstein, yes, I had it written down, yes. And Ann Canese. As you saw coming in, we have some great door prizes from many of our city and neighboring businesses. We'll be drawing for these prizes at the end of the seminar, so keep your ticket handy. I just want to name some of the businesses that donated. Boston Stoker of Centerville, Centerville Carryout, Centerville Florist, the City of Centerville, City Barbecue, Esther Price, Grandma's Gardens, Siebenthalers, Sweeney's Seafood Restaurant, and the 3 beautiful gardening baskets prepared and donated by our own Carol Adams. And Yankee Trace, we have some gift cards for the brunch at Yankee Trace. If anyone is interested in learning more about the Dayton Garden Groups, we have some representatives here today. She has her sign up, so if anyone is interested in learning more about that, please see them after the seminar. Our presenter is Siebenthaler's Garden Center's Michael Blanca. Mike is a 60-year resident of Centerville and a Centerville High School graduate. He has an associate degree in both horticulture and business. He has been in this business in some capacity since 1974. He has been with Siebenthaler's for 40 years and the manager for the last 30 years. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. If any of you have ever been to one of my talks, one of the first things that I say is, it's only gardening. Okay, please keep it in perspective, it's only gardening. It's enjoyable, it's a hobby. Don't make it more than what it is, all right? Why low maintenance gardening? If you're a young couple, maybe just starting off, maybe you have, your first house, you have your first child, you may say to yourself, I don't really have time for gardening. And little Sarah's going to grow up and she's going to play soccer. And I'm not going to have time to take her to soccer and still have a high maintenance yard. That would be one reason for low maintenance gardening. A second one is if you're a veteran gardener and you decide that, you know what, I think I want to make my yard a little less maintenance. I want to enjoy my time a little bit more, especially as we all get up there in years. Some of the things that we used to be able to do for 6, 8 hours a day, we can't do. But that's where low maintenance gardening comes in. Now, low maintenance gardening does not mean no maintenance. Okay, it is the right plant for the right place. It's finding the plant that will tolerate the sun shade mix that you may have. It's finding the right plant that will tolerate the dry or moist conditions that your area may have. And it's, quite frankly, it's finding the right plant for the right space, the size of the plant. You never want to put a plant that's going to get 6 by 6 into a place that's going to get 3 by 3. That's where the high maintenance part of it comes in. This right here is obviously a lot of maintenance. Beautiful. I wish it was my backyard, but it's not. But that right there is high maintenance. This right here is no maintenance. I'm not sure who lives there, but it looks really, really scary. We're going to start off with some of the shady area perennials, and then we're going to move into sunny area perennials. Hostas, one of the neatest plants that we have. So many different varieties. You can use them in just about any shady area. They don't really tolerate sun very well, although some people they try it. It's not something we necessarily recommend. But one thing I like about hostas is the way that they flow together with various sizes and various colors of the leaves, and it's just a really nice low maintenance plant. The thing you want to do with hostas is make sure at the end of the fall you cut them down before we get a real hard freeze, because after that they become mush. And if anybody's ever had to go in and cut a field full of hostas or a big bed of hostas, it's gross, to be honest with you. So you want to make sure you cut these down fairly early. Ferns. Ferns are one of the easiest shady plants to grow. All kinds of different heights, all kinds of different leaves. It's just an interesting plant for the shady area that you want to just put them in and just leave them. Once again, as with most perennials, you're going to have to cut them back at the end of the season. A stilbe. If you want a little color in a flower bed where you get a decent amount of shade, a stilbe is a terrific plant. Once again, it's not something that it's not going to bloom the entire year. There are some varieties that bloom quite late or quite long during the course of the year. But with staggering different varieties, you can get a little bit of color in those shady areas where maybe necessarily you couldn't. Coral bells is another one that I really like, just not only the foliage, but it's got a real delicate flower, and that's one that will really liven up a kind of a shady area. These right here at the end of the blooming time, just cut them back. It's not really a high maintenance thing, but the spikes, they'll look good for a while, but then after a while they start looking a little ratty. So it might be something you might consider cutting back after they're done blooming. Pachysandra, one of my favorite ground covers. Pachysandra does terrific in this area. The only thing you want to make sure with Pachysandra is make sure that you're not putting it in an area where it's going to stay extremely wet, because they do develop a fungus that can start rotting out the stems of the plant. But this makes a real nice carpet, and it's going to get to be about 4 inches high, have a little whitish yellow bloom on it. Once it gets established, it does terrific in this area. You might have a weed coming up here or there, but nothing really heavy maintenance. Periwinkle's another one. Now this will not be as thick as the Pachysandra. It's kind of a viney type of ground cover that does real well in this area. It's got a little bluish flower on it. It kind of vines a little bit. It's not real good for real sunny areas. They tend to get they'll grow in a sunnier area, but they tend to thin out a little bit when they're in too much sun. And that's just because it's really more for a shady area. But you know, sometimes you could push the envelope a little bit, or if you have some that's kind of creeping into a sunnier area, it should be all right. It may just not look quite as well as it would if it was in a shadier area. Getting into some of the sunny perennials, this is one of the easiest ones. Daylilies, basically you just throw them into the ground and you leave them. They just don't require a whole lot of maintenance. Once again, you're going to want to cut these blooms back after they're done blooming. Cut the whole stem back. The stem is not real attractive looking. It doesn't really, the flowers tend to fall off, so it's really going to look kind of ratty looking if it's just sitting out there about 6 or 8 inches taller than the foliage. But this is one that you can divide at the end of the season. If you have a big area, you start in a couple little clumps, and then over the years, just start dividing them out. That's the easiest way to do those. Not a lot of maintenance, but a little bit. Coneflower, the echinacea. This is a real neat looking plant. I'll tell you, it looked a lot better on my computer screen. This is a little blurry, I think. But the echinacea, that's a real easy perennial to grow. Once again, at the end of the season, just go ahead and just cut it back. Some of these you could even cut back fairly heavily in months of September, October. If you don't want to wait till the very end of fall, they start looking a little weather-worn after a bit, so you might go ahead and you might just cut them back a little bit early. It's not going to hurt it too much if it's going into the fall. You don't really want to cut them back in the summertime. Sometimes they're still producing food for the plants, so you want to make sure that you give them every opportunity to do that. Cranesbill or the hardy geranium, many colors of these, many sizes. This one right here, I love the vibrant blue, and that really is a real nice look for an area that maybe you're trying to tie in some yellows and some light pinks, things like that. It's just kind of a calming type of color. Once again, after the blooms start fading off, you might just go ahead and just give the whole thing just a little haircut, just to shape it up a little bit. Makes it look a little neat, a little tidier. I believe that this variety here is going to get to be about 15 inches, 12 to 15 inches. My partner in crime from last year, Sandy Berkeley, who is our perennial expert down at Siebenthaler's, she had ankle surgery. So she is not here today. And I'll tell you, she knows her perennials, but way more than me. But there's so many varieties out there, and some of them, to be quite honestly, we're not even sure what we're going to have this year because there's such a shortage of some of these perennials. And with housing and so forth, and new houses being built, and the housing market just taking off, there's going to be a real shortage in a lot of things like perennials, arborvitaes, things like that. Ajuga, that's a nice ground cover for sunny areas. It can grow in the shade as well, as with the myrtle or the vinca. The sunnier areas or the shadier areas, it may thin out a little bit, okay? It may not give you the same look as it would if it was in a little shadier area. I like the foliage on these. There's many different types of color variations. There's some bronze, there's some purples, there's some mixes that really look nice. We carry probably 4 or 5 different varieties of the ajuga, so it's something that's I don't think it's used as much as it could be, but it's a real nice ground cover. Does real nicely in this area. Tends to handle the moisture a little bit better than say something like Pachysandra. Sedum, this is one of the hardiest sunny ground covers that we carry. These things are just almost indestructible. As long as they're getting a lot of sun, they're going to be in heaven. Very drought tolerant, very thick foliage on it, which will absolutely help out during some of those months in July and August when we are in a 2-month drought. Color variations as far as the foliage can be green, light green, dark green, reds, flower colors, reds. The red dragon is beautiful. You don't see a lot of it around. Usually the one that is the most prevalent is the Siebenthaler, which is a yellowish. And once again, those get a little bit of height to them. The Siebenthaler is going to be about 3 to 4 inches high. Some of the other ones, like Red Dragon, it's going to be more of a viney type, but they're very hardy for your sunnier areas. Like I say, good drought tolerance. Arborvitaes. These are the ones that are going to be in short supply this year, and it's not just us, it's all over. It's a Midwest thing right now. This right here is the emerald arborvitae, or the smerig. That is a classic look right there with a tall blank wall, and you want to break up that sight line a little bit. You'll find these things all over neighborhoods, usually on the corner of houses. Gives you a little bit of height. Doesn't get real wide, maybe about 3 feet or so. Low maintenance plant. It doesn't have to be trimmed every year. If you want to keep it small, if you want to keep it 6 or 8 feet high, you can, if you trim it once a year, you can keep it that high. It doesn't have to get to be 10 or 12 foot. Most of these plants will do with very minimal trimming. It's just what you want to do with it. That's the main thing. This one right here is the yellow ribbon. This one is going to be the equivalent to the smerig as far as the height. It gets a little bit wider. These definitely need to have a little bit more sun, okay? Anything with this yellow color, this one right here, and its magic ball, those are ones that need a little bit of sun to keep that color out and really keep it vivid. If it's in a little shadier area, it will be kind of a limey green. It won't be a real vivid yellow, but it still looks nice. If it's in an area where maybe it's half and half, if you have 3 of them in a corner and maybe one of them gets a little bit more sun, you'll definitely see a difference. This one over here, Mr. Bowling Ball, we just like this one. It's got a neat name. It's a great texture. Doesn't get real big. These two right here, Mr. Bowling Ball and Anna's Magic Ball, these get to be about 2 to 3 feet. Very low maintenance, any maintenance at all. They're just a nice little plant for areas where maybe you need like a little foundation planting. Also, these are nice where you're trying to create maybe a little area where you've got 3 or 4 different types of evergreens of various sizes and heights and colors. And those areas can be very interesting looking. You know, not everything has to flower. Not everything has to have a bloom to it or a fall color to look nice. The fact that these will hold their foliage all year round, it's just a nice break of the eye for, you know, a backyard or something like that, where, you know, you're trying to keep a little bit of visual there all winter long. Junipers are a little bit more sun-loving than the arborvitaes. Arborvitaes are a sun-loving plant, but they'll handle a little bit more shade. Junipers tend to get a little bit thin after a number of years if they're in too much shade. They don't really like wet conditions either. Junipers will get very thin looking, they'll get very ratty, they will start suffering from root rot in very wet conditions. So you have to be very careful where you're putting these. Main thing is they like a little bit of sun. This is one up here, Troutman. This is one of my favorites. Tall, narrow, doesn't get real wide at all. This one over here, Taylor, that's another one that doesn't get real wide. And you can see the area up in here where they're mixing in a couple of different types of plants, and you're not going to want something that's going to get 5 or 8 feet wide in that kind of area. This gives you a little bit of vertical look, kind of breaks your eye up a little bit, and they do real nicely in this area because we tend to get go through some drought. The main thing is that you want to make sure that it's not in an area where you're getting a lot of runoff and things like that. So you got to be real careful if you're putting these on a corner of a house where maybe your drain is coming through there. You want to make sure that these are not staying too wet because they will suffer from root rot. Gray owl, this one over here, this is kind of a nice medium spreader, 2 to 3 feet. It could get up to probably 5 foot if you let it. Now this is one that they will eat up some space. Okay, so you see how these branches are real long right in here. These things will eat up space, so you want to make sure that maybe trim them once a year, once every couple of years, so that they don't get out of hand. With any type of juniper, any type of arborvitae, even taxus, you want to make sure that you're pruning as they grow. Okay, and that goes back to the size of the plant and the area of the plant. If you're trying to put a plant in that will maybe get 5 or 6 feet and you want to put it into a 3 or 4 foot area, trim it a little bit as it grows during the course of the year. You don't want to let it get to be 5 foot and then try to trim it back to 3. But something like this is going to do real well if you just trim that about once a year. Trim some of these longer branches back, maybe about 4 to 6 inches, and then that way it'll keep nice and full through the rest of its existence in that area. This right here, icy blue, this is kind of the new blue carpet juniper. You'll see a lot more of these out, and I think it's because there's more of a shortage for some varieties, so they're introducing other varieties to take its place. Icy blue is one that it's going to be a ground cover type, 4 to 6 inches at the max. It really is going to be more, 3 to 4 inches. This is one you'll see in rock gardens. It kind of ties in the area between your yard and, say, the front door, where that flower bed's sitting out there and you don't want to have just a lot of mulch sitting out there. So maybe you throw a couple of these junipers in, and that will kind of give you a little bit more green throughout the year. And the fact that it's evergreen is really nice because, once again, sometimes you put something in and all of a sudden you realize, wow, there's nothing there in the wintertime. So something like this will kind of add to the ground texture. Now, getting into the spruces, we selected, and I say we because I didn't do this on my own, have spruces for about every type of area. This right here is Black Hills. That is a little slower growing than, say, Norway. It's not going to grow as fast as Norway, but it's not going to get quite as big as Norway. They're a beautiful plant, very, very low maintenance. You literally can just plop these in the ground and leave them. The main thing you want to make sure with these plants that are out here in flower beds like that is make sure that they're getting decently watered, especially during times of drought. Your plants that are existing, that are maybe 10, 12, 15 years old, those plants still need water. And we have seen over the last few years, we go into these periods of drought in July and August, and what ends up happening is that the existing plants just are not able to take up as much water. Another thing we're seeing is that with the amount of spring rains that we get, a lot of plants are starting to suffer from root rot. We're seeing that with a lot of pines. They're starting to suffer from a little bit of root rot, and then when they need to take up water, say July and August, when we go through a 2-month drought, the root system isn't there to support them. So what you may do is you may consider throwing a sprinkler out there. If we're going 2 or 3 weeks heavy into a drought, throw a sprinkler out there and really water that thing pretty heavily. There's a big difference between replacing that and replacing this, okay? So you want to make sure, especially with your big existing plants, especially your evergreens, you want to make sure that you give them some good deep waterings if we're into a period of drought. Even in the fall time, the late fall, there's periods where it's a good time to water, mainly because the plant is going to be going into the winter time. It's going to be losing moisture because of heavy winds and things like that we'll have in the winter time. So you want to make sure that they're not drying out over the course of the winter. This right here is Alberta spruce. Not one of my favorite plants. I see them all over. It seems like everybody that's got a clay pot in their front yard has an Alberta spruce in there at some point. I have a friend of mine who's had one, probably, he lives off of Normandy Lane, and 50 years I bet that thing has been there. And because I look at this 10-foot Alberta spruce and think, what did this thing look like 50 years ago sitting in the middle of your yard? But it's huge, and it's gorgeous, and he does nothing to it. But the Alberta spruce, this is a nice one for pots. You can put them in small space areas. It's not going to outgrow the space in any length of time. It's just a neat little compact plant. Like I say, it's not one of my favorites, but you know, there is a use for about everything that we have here. Globe blue spruce, this is another one that there's a lot of variations of this, and you want to make sure that you're picking out the right variety for the space. There's some varieties like St. Mary's broom, 3x3, easy plant to grow, doesn't grow real fast. And then you get into some varieties, just the true globosa, and those varieties can get up to be 6 or 7 feet high and wide. And it's just a matter of time. All of a sudden you look out and you're like, wow, that thing's starting to creep over into the sidewalk. By that time, it's probably a little too late to start trimming it back. With things like this right here and this right here, you don't want to let those get too big too fast, because what happens is that when you start trimming back, you're going to end up with big bare spots right in here. So you've got to be very careful that if it looks like it's going to creep into your sidewalk, you start trimming it back a little every spring just to kind of keep it nice and compact. It'll look a lot better. This right here, Little Gem, along with the bird's nest spruce, those are ones that you can keep them 2x3 very easily. Little Gem is probably the smaller growing of the two. Bird's nest can get big. They can get big. They can be 4 or 5 feet wide if you let them. But you want to make sure that you're kind of keeping them under control. I know my mother and father, they had some that were in an area that was 2 feet wide growing up, and I tell you, within about 10 years, that thing was creeping over into the sidewalk and everything else. And you know, at the time I was like 11. I didn't realize that, wow, I should be trimming this thing. But it's a nice little plant. And once again, good small space plant. Going into the pines, there's so many different types of pines out there. We have, I bet, probably 20 to 25 varieties of pines that we'll have during the course of the season. You get something like this, Vanderwolf. Vanderwolf gets huge. It's a great little plant that, you know, 25, 30 feet high. It's got a real irregular shape to it, which a lot of people like. Pines in general do not have a conical shape as an adult. They're going to be more along the lines of, they're not like a conical spruce or anything like that. They're going to have a little bit of shape to them, and just a real interesting looking plant. This one right here, Angel Falls, that is one, and I see this up close to the house, and I don't necessarily agree with putting it in that little space because it will get big in just a number of years. This is one that I think that these people right here probably trim that about once a year to keep them nice and compact. I don't really see this plant outgrowing the space anytime soon, but eventually it could, mainly because of its growth habit. It's kind of a weeping type, but as it's growing, it's going to start spreading out. You can see it's spreading out already more towards the top as opposed to the body of the plant. That's that weeping look that you're going to get sometimes. That is a nice accent plant, nice specimen plant for like the corner of the house, something like that. This over here is Thunderhead. This is a very interesting plant that you can do a lot with, just depending on how much maintenance you want to do with it. This one right here, I think that they're letting this one grow out a little bit. It looks like it's got some space, looks like it can, get to be 6-8 feet wide. I don't think that that's out of place at all. But Thunderhead's a real nice one for a specimen plant that you want to get a little bit of width to. It's not going to be like, like Big Tuna or Vanderwolf or even the Angel Falls where you're going to get a lot of height out of it. It's going to be more along the lines of spreading out. It's going to give you a very oriental look. And once again, if you want to keep this a little smaller, you'll have to prune it a little bit more. You want to make sure that you're pruning these when they're candling in the springtime. Don't try to prune this at, in the fall time. You'll start messing up the shape of it. So you want to make sure that you're pruning these things at the right time. Slow mound, this is a real nice one. Doesn't get real big. There's many different types of Mugo pine varieties. These are ones that you could put close to your house. You could put underneath windows, things like that. 3 feet by 3 feet, that's a nice size for it. Part of the problem we run into with plants in our area is there's so much information out there, and so much information is coming from different areas. When something like this is growing out in Washington State, it's going to get a lot bigger. Their climate is different, their soil is different. Even up in New York State, some of the plants that will get 10 or 12 foot up there might only get 6 or 8 foot here. So some of the information out there you got to be very, very careful with. When we're doing our signs for our, we call them the talking cards, but when we're doing talking cards, we have about 3 or 4 people within our company, not just our store, review them. We review them constantly because we have about 1,000 to make. So we're always reviewing these things. We have different people to do it. We're looking at different websites because you can get a lot of different information out there, and it might be something where it might vary by 30 or 40%. So you got to be real careful that the plant is zoned for this area, but you want to make sure that the plant size is for this area. Okay, some of these things that would maybe get 18, 20 feet out in Oregon maybe only get 6 or 8 feet here, or vice versa. So you want to make sure that you're doing a little bit of research, and like I say, I know the talking cards that we make up, we review these every year, and we have people that at a couple of different locations that they'll review them as well. But Mugo pine, that's a real nice little one. What you won't see on this slide presentation is taxus. I think anything we can do to kind of break that up, it seems like those at one point in time or another were probably in about everybody's yard. These right here, the Mugo pine, that's a nice little foundation plant that has a little bit more character than just a row of taxus. Now, broadleaf evergreens, these are ones that they can be difficult to grow in our area, but they're not impossible to grow. The southern magnolia up here, this is Bracken's brown right here. This is a hardy variety of southern magnolia. These hold their foliage all year round. The problem you run into is that sometimes we go from 0 to 60 and back to 0, okay? And when we are at sub-zero for 3 or 4 days, and then all of a sudden, a week later, we are, at 60 degrees, and then vice versa. That's very difficult on broadleaf evergreens. Southern magnolia it's a nice tree. It's got a great bloom on it. The problem is it's not a super heavy bloomer. Okay, it will grow here. The height, it can vary. I've seen some that have been in middle of people's yards that are 25 feet. I've seen some that people have kept controlled, maybe on the corner of a house or something like that. It's a nice plant, but I would not necessarily put a hedgerow of them simply because of the chance of a hard winter that could really kill this thing back. The good thing is that if it starts looking bad in the springtime, early part of the spring, don't take it out, leave it go, because sometimes they will recover over the course of the spring. We have one on the south side of our building, which is not a great spot for it, but we like to push the envelope a little bit, and it doesn't get much shade at all. It might get a little bit of morning shade, if that, and it typically does not look good until about June. And then all of a sudden it starts greening up, and one day we'll walk by and it's like, wow, this thing really looks nice. So they can recover. I think that's part of the development process that they put into it when it was zoned for this area. This right here is Ilex. That's a blue princess right there. I would be very, very skeptical about putting these in sunny areas. Shady areas tend to be a little bit better for these. Blue Prince, Blue Princess, the China Hollies, China Girl, China Boy. The problem with these is that they're a little bit more sensitive to those fluctuating temperatures that I was speaking of. They're a little bit more susceptible to windburn, a little bit more susceptible to the fluctuating temperatures. They will grow here. I would put them in a little bit more of a protected spot, maybe on eastern side of your house or north side of your house. I don't necessarily think I would put a hedgerow of these. I would not have these on the south side of the front of your house, especially up against a wall, like a brick wall or stone wall, something like that. The reflection of the sun can be very, very bad for these. This right here is a much better broadleaf evergreen for a sunnier area, boxwoods. Super hardy in this area. There's about 4 or 5 varieties that I'm very, very comfortable with, and we as a company are very comfortable with putting in sunnier areas. We actually will field grow these out in Beaver Creek, and it does not get any shade where these are grown. So we're pretty comfortable with the fact that these are a good sunny plant. You can do a lot with them. You can box them off, you can round them off, you can make a hedge of them. You can keep them small, foot, 15 inches high and wide. This variety right here, I think that's green velvet, it looks like. A little smaller leaf, a little lighter in color. Some of the varieties like Varder Valley, we've had Varder Valleys at our South Garden Center that have been facing the southwest for over 30 years. And we now have one little place about this big that is browning out. But Varder Valley is a great type of boxwood. This one over here, this is inkberry. It was not my choice to put inkberry up there. I'm not a big inkberry fan. I think that they are typically a zone 6 plant. I don't think that they're very, very touchy around here. So you want to make sure that you're putting these in a spot where it does not get a lot of afternoon sun, a lot of afternoon wind, even in the wintertime. If you have an area where it's nice and shady, if that area is going to be a sunny area come January, I would not put inkberry in. They're just a little marginal of a plant. Getting into some of the flowering shrubs, potentillas, a lot of different types of potentillas. Yellows, pinks, orange, whites. Easy plant to grow. Think about potentillas, it's going to give you some bloom during the summertime. If they stop blooming a little bit, you want to give them a nice haircut, they'll start reblooming again. It's just a real easy plant to grow. They'll handle a little bit of drought, but you want to make sure that once again, as it gets older, they'll start thinning out a little bit if it's not really cared for. I don't want to say it needs to be watered constantly, but it's not a plant that looks really good if it's left to fend for itself for water. But it's a very, very easy plant to grow. Give you a lot of color in the summertime. Weigelia, you don't see a lot of Weigelia out there, I don't think. There'll be some areas, shopping centers. You'll see sometimes a lot of Weigelia there because it does give you a couple of different seasons. They'll bloom in the springtime and then sporadically through the summertime. But what I like about Weigelia is you can see all the variations of the colors of the leaves. And that's really what I think is one of its main attributes. This one right here, Wine and Roses, has kind of a maroonish foliage to it. And The things with maroons, they do need a decent amount of sun to really keep the color out, okay? Barberry's overused, but that's one that, you know, it will start fading to a greenish color if it's not getting enough sun. Wygelias and nine bark, I think, are just kind of a nice change of pace. You know, it doesn't always have to be a crimson pygmy barberry and a burning bush and a boxwood all together. You know, we can change it up a little bit. This one right here, My Monet, is one of my favorites. I have never seen one that really looked great sitting in a nursery in a pot. For some reason, when you get them out of the pot, they really flourish. And I've been to, you know, garden centers all over the area, and the My Monets that I've seen just have never really looked that great in a 1 or 2 gallon pot for some reason. And once they're in the ground, they look great. My Monet is a real nice one. Doesn't get real big at all, maybe 15, 18, 20 inches high. It can spread out a little bit more than that, I think, but it's a real easy one to grow. And once again, it's going to have a nice spring bloom to it. And then all of a sudden, every once in a while in the summertime, you'll see, you know, half a dozen blooms on it. It's just kind of a neat little plant that will give you a little bit of 2 or 3 season color. Spireas. Now, spireas are a lot like potentillas. You have to hack them back about once a year to really keep them looking good, okay? If you just let these grow, they'll really sprawl out, okay? This one up here, which is the old-fashioned spirea, that one should be hacked back in the springtime, probably about 1/3 of the way back. If not, it's going to get huge. These are not ones that I would necessarily put close to your house. I would put that on a border of a yard. I would put those as not necessarily a privacy border, but one that's going to just add a little bit of springtime color to a backyard. Not everything has to be a forsythia. That seems to be the one of the border plants of choice back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This one right here, I believe we're looking at Gold Flame, it looks like, or Magic Carpet. These 3 varieties are all going to be very similar. The foliage is going to be that's going to be the main difference, is the foliage, but the flower color is going to be pretty consistent throughout the course of the summer. It's going to have anywhere from a pink to a reddish bloom. Neon is one that's very brilliant, very vibrant. The thing with spireas is that depending on when they're cut back, and depending on the season, if it's an early spring, they're going to start blooming a little bit earlier. So maybe by July or August, they're looking a little spent. Once again, just take a pair of loppers, trim them back about 1/3 of the way back, and most of the time you can get them to rebloom very easily. We cut these back at our garden center. We'll cut these back at least once a year, but it's not a real hard plant to cut back. There's no thorns or anything like that. What I like about these 3 is the fall color, and it varies. It's not going to be just a pure red. It'll be variations of red. It may not be just an orange. It'll be maybe yellowish orange. So that's one that can kind of brighten up the the foundation of a house. Maybe if you have evergreens along with these, you'll have something that makes a nice contrast. Something like like a muga pine or a euonymus of some type. Something with a dark foliage. They're not as high maintenance as people think. Usually, it's just cutting it back maybe once a year. Hydrangeas. This is a topic all in itself. These can grow in sun or shade. We probably carry 25 different types of hydrangeas. Some will do better in the sun than others. The thing with hydrangeas is, once again, you want to put it in the right spot for the size. These over in here, these 3 varieties right here are going to get huge. Okay, these are sun-loving varieties. We've got Limelight. This one right here, I think, is a little Quickfire. That doesn't get quite as big. These 2 varieties right here, these are both oak leaf hydrangea. These can get huge if you let them, okay? Some of the hybrids that are out there right now don't get quite as big. Ruby Slippers, this one right here, that is one that if you let it grow, it will get big, but not quite as big as the standard oak leaf hydrangea, which can get up to about 10 feet. What I like about them is that they have a nice heavy leaf. They'll take a lot of sun. One of the things about hydrangeas is that some of your varieties, the macro varieties, as well as things like Annabelle, the old-fashioned, a lot of times, if they're in a sunny area, they will look like they're drying out. They'll have a droopy look to them, and you may be out there watering them every other day, and they may not need it. It's just the foliage. The foliage is it's a little lighter. It's not quite as heavy as, say, something like oak leaf. And a lot of times you'll look out and you'll see your hydrangea just look like it's wilting, and it may not be, but that's just from the heat. A lot of times with hydrangeas, when it's very hot in, say, the month of August, they may not be coloring like they should be. They may not be quite as vibrant. A lot of it has to do with the heat. And when the nighttime start cooling off a little bit, that's when the ones like the quick fire, things like that, the ones that are pinkish, they'll start turning more from a whitish or lime green blossom to more of a pink, which they should be. A lot of times it's just the heat. So don't be concerned about those at all. Viburnums, this is one of the best flowering shrubs that we sell. This is what I consider to be a three-season plant. You're going to have a great bloom in the springtime. This one right here, Jetta viburnum, or it's a hybrid Carlosi, that is a real nice one, very fragrant. And this one, I think, will handle a little bit more shade than what people are maybe giving it credit for. This is one right here that we probably sell more of these than we do just about any other one. Not necessarily a great hedging plant. I wouldn't want it, to try to get this thing to be 10 or 12 feet. It's going to be more along the lines of a specimen plant on the corner of a house, or maybe to break up a wall, something like that. Nothing that's going to really give you much privacy. It has great fall color. It's going to be a kind of maroonish fall color. And then it'll have a really nice red berry on it. One of the things I like about viburnums is that they do have a berry that will hold pretty late into the wintertime until the birds start getting them. So it's a plant that, once again, it's got to have three seasons of interest. I like the dentatum varieties because they'll take a lot more shade, and they have a blue berry to them. Now these are ones that can get anywhere from 4 to 7 feet, and there's some varieties that can get up to be about 10 feet. Green luster will get huge, and I like the foliage on it. It's got a real nice dark green glossy foliage, blueberry. The blooms are not quite as fragrant as, say, the Jetta viburnum or the Birkwood viburnum. They're not quite as fragrant, but it's still a nice bloom. And it's the blueberries, I think, just adds another layer of interest. This one right here, Brandywine, I like the foliage on that. It's a smooth, glossy foliage. This is the fall color. Your viburnums, as a general rule of thumb, have very nice fall color, as I said. This one right here, we don't see a lot of them out there right now. I don't think it's new in our area. I think that a lot of places just have not carried them for a while. I know we've only carried them for a few years. Maurici, that is actually a hybrid of the double file viburnum. And Maurici, the true parent plant, can get huge. It can get as wide as it does tall. Fragrant bloom, not as fragrant as the Jedi, but that is one, if you want to screen a neighbor off and you want to eat up some space, that's a good one to do it. Has a nice fall color. The fall color is going to be kind of a purplish reddish, even have some tinges of yellow. Sometimes when I speak of fall color and people will say, what kind of fall color does it have? Well, it's going to be yellow. Well, what kind of fall color? Yellow's a color, okay? It may not be a beautiful red, but it's a yellow. Some of your shady shrubs. This one right here, Itea, definitely is underused. There's 2 or 3 in the shady plants that I really like. These are 2 different types. This one right here is Little Henry. I like the blooms on those. Those are just a neat bloom. They're kind of wispy looking, and they don't get real big. They only get to be about 3 by 3, and it's just a nice little plant. This is the parent plant over here, Henry's Garnet. Great fall color. This will have the similar fall color as this one right here. It's going to have the same blooms. That can get to be about 4 to 6 feet high and wide. But I like the Itea because you don't see a lot of them around. And sometimes the variations that you can start putting in your yard is going to create a little ebb and flow in your neighborhood. Wow, they've got something a little different. What is that? You know, and that's how people are going to get away from putting, you know, a taxus, a burning bush, a crimson pygmy barberry in your yard. This one right here is Summer Sweet or Clethra, summer blooming plant. I like it because of that reason. It blooms in the summer. You don't see a ton of stuff blooming in the summer, but this is one that it attracts some butterflies, and very, very nice plant for shady areas. These both also will take some sun as well. It's got a decent fall color. I think the consistency of the fall color is not as prevalent as it is in, say, a viburnum or itea or something like that. It's going to be a little inconsistent. Clethra is a nice plant. Once again, I don't think that we see a lot of them out there, but there's small varieties. There's ones that get to be 4 to 6 feet high, and it's a good plant for shade especially, but it'll take some sun. This is one of my favorite plants, Fathergia. This right here is Blue Shadow, and this picture does not do it justice. Blue Shadow has kind of a bluish foliage to it, especially in its shade. Now, they will take some sun. Mount Airy gets a little bit bigger. Blue Shadow, they're both going to get to be, 3 to 5 feet right around in there. But it's just got a great looking foliage to it. Doesn't really seem to get any insects or diseases. That's another real nice thing about it. This is the bloom on both of them, and it's kind of a fun looking little bloom. They just come in white. I've never seen them in pinks or anything like that. Once again, the fall color is going to be a real nice maroonish red. Doesn't get quite as vibrant as a burning bush, but they do real nicely in our area. Smooth hydrangeas, back to the hydrangeas. Sun or shade on a lot of them. This is the Annabelle right here. This variety right here, these are ones that do a little bit better in the shade, and the reason is that you can see the foliage is a little bit lighter in texture. Okay, these are the ones that when they're in the sun in August and there's a big heavy drought, these are the ones that are going to look like they're drying out, and they may not be. They may be perfectly fine. But Annabelle, that's the old-fashioned one. That gets to be about 4 by 4, 5 by 5. Very, very easy to grow these both. Typically, they'll do a little bit better in the shade than they will the sun. They can acclimate themselves, though. But there's so many varieties out there. I would tend to want to get something that was more tolerant of either sun or shade as opposed to trying to force feed it into a certain area. Like I say, the hydrangeas could be a topic all in itself, because I tell you, these things, there's so many varieties. Easy to grow. The only problem with hydrangeas is these are probably some of the most inconsistent blooming plants that we carry. Okay, and it's not the varieties. It's just sometimes they bloom, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're doing everything right. It may not be you, but they all have their spot. Now, Invincible Spirit, that's a real nice one. It's going to be closer to Invincible, which is a dwarf variety. It's just it's a pink variety of the parent plant. Most of these have whites and pinks, variations like Limelight has little lime, things like that. So, most of these they can be more than one color, even within the species. A lot of your blues, you can make a little, if you let it go and don't do much fertilization, or you don't add a little soil sulfur, a lot of times they can fade into a pink. Some people like the pinks, but if you really want to have those vibrant blues like Endless Summer, the old standard was Nico Blue. Those are ones that you have to add a little soil sulfur around here. They just don't stay, they just don't have enough in the soil to really keep in that bloom. This is a sweet shrub. This is very underused as well. These can get kind of big. There's a couple of different varieties of these. This one right here is the Heartledge Wine, and you can see it's got just a really unusual color. These can get to be about 4 to 6 feet high if you let them. It's a nice plant for like a corner of your house where you want something blooming. It'll bloom a little bit later than the springtime. It just, like I say, a lot depends on the weather. This one right here is the Venus. You can see it's just a very unusual flower. We don't see a lot of these out there. I like the foliage on them. It's kind of a medium-sized leaf, nice dark glossy leaf. But that's one that, like I say, you don't see tons of them out there. But it's something where if you had a shady area and you want something that was kind of brighten it up a little bit with a flower, these would be ones you might consider because they're going to be a little bit later blooming than some of the other plants. Okay, sunny trees, tulip trees. Love tulip trees. Not too many trees this size are going to have this bloom to them. They do real well in this area. They'll handle some moisture, not necessarily going to be like a willow and suck up, half the water in your yard, but it's one that it's tolerant. Let's put it that way. It's tolerant. fast growing. Fall colors can be kind of a yellowish color, but they have a real big, large leaf, which provides a lot of shade and are a lot easier to clean up than, say, a locust tree. I really like the tulip trees. A lot of these trees, you just don't see tons of them out there. If you do, it's, you know, it's here and there. You know, most people are still hooked on maples, and I keep waiting for the ash trees to make a comeback. I think one of these years they probably are going to start making a little comeback, especially when nurseries around here start growing them again. But tulip trees are a real nice tree. Tupelo, black Tupelo, one of my all-time favorites. Love the fall color of the black Tupelo. I love the fact that when we get them in, they're low branched so that you can let it do this, or you can limb it up and let it grow so you can mow it under a little bit easier. I love the fall color of the Tupelo. I also like, this is wildfire right here, and you can see the new growth is has this kind of reddish hue to it. It's got a real nice dark glossy leaf, and then when this comes out, it really has a nice contrast to it. One of the things I like about the black Tupelos is they really don't seem to get anything. They really don't seem to get any aphids or have much problems with diseases or anything like that. Just a real low maintenance plant. Yeah, not real fast growing. European beech, every American and European beech at some point in its lifetime should have a tree fort in it, because these are just one of the biggest, best growing trees we have. And you just don't see a lot of them out there in people's yards, mainly because they get huge, 60, 80 feet. But they're a beautiful, beautiful tree. Variations of the beech trees, obviously not the European. This is tricolor right here. This is a nice one for sunny areas if you have a little patience and you can tolerate a little bit of leaf scorch now and then. This is primarily more of a semi-shady plant, the tricolor. It will take some sun. If anybody ever goes to the China Cottage restaurant, they've got one sitting right in front of their store, and it gets blasted all day long. And because they did it about 5 years ago, we thought, well, we're going to do the same thing. We have one of these sitting right out on Far Hills, and it does fine out there, but it has to acclimate itself. The one we put out there had a broken branch, and somebody brought it back, and we said, well, let's put it in the front and see how it does, and it's grown very nicely. Every blue moon, we might get a little scorch on it, but generally, as a rule of thumb, they will handle a little bit more sun. You got to be patient with it. You don't expect it every year to be beautiful, okay? But if you have an area where you can, you know, have a little bit of shade or light shade, it does a lot better. It'll like itself a lot better. But if not, if you put it in the sun, worst case scenario is it'll have a little bit of leaf scorch on it towards the top, maybe in August when we go through a little bit of a drought. This one right here, obelisk, that's kind of a tall, narrow one. And when I say narrow, it's not going to stay like 3 or 4 feet wide, okay? It eventually can get to be 15 feet wide, but it's going to have that tall, kind of upright shape to it, which is very unusual. You'll see these a lot in parking lots where people want the height, but they don't necessarily have the room for the width. I know down at the Donatos, down on Stroop Road, Stroop and Far Hills, they've got some hornbeam, which are beautiful, but they shear them. It's going to have a very similar shape like this. But those are ones that, you know, if the business doesn't have a lot of width, but they want some height, it's a good little plant for that. This one right here is the purple fountain, and purple fountain can get big if you let it, but it's a great kind of weeping type of specimen tree, a lot of sun, really bring that color out. Once again, it's not a plant that is used a lot, but you see them, you know, now and then in a lot of places that have high areas, maybe a building that has got you know, a 2-story wall that they want to cover up or break up the eye. That's a good spot for that. Corner of the house where maybe you've got a large 2-story house that you want to kind of add a little bit of color to it as well as some height. But purple fountain's a real nice one as well. Now, when you get some of these, like the purple fountain and the tricolor beech, because of the way that they grow, they don't look like a whole lot when you first buy them. When you first come in, you look at them, you're like, wow, this looks like crap. And you got to give it time. You got to give it time. They're not going to grow, a lot of branches real quickly. They don't do well growing in pots. They do a lot better if they're grown in the field. Okay, what happens in a pot is that they grow tall, but they don't really get much branching on them. So that's why people like to grow them in the field, and they can up pot them for retail sales. Bald cypress, you definitely don't see a lot of these out there. Just a real unusual plant. This one right here, Cascading Falls, that's a real nice specimen. Once again, that would be like the Purple Fountain Beach when, if you had an area where you really wanted to cover up a wall or you want to add a real nice specimen. They're just very unusual plants. They'll handle some moisture. They are deciduous. The foliage looks like it's an evergreen, but they will lose their leaves. And they've got kind of a nice bark. It's kind of a tannish bark that peels sometimes. And just kind of a nice little unusual plant that you don't see a lot around. It's not going to be a great shade tree or anything like that. It's more one that you would take and you would put it out in your backyard or your side yard just to kind of add a little bit of interest, but it's not something that's necessarily going to provide you with a whole lot of shade. Yellowwood, these are very underused. We don't sell a lot of them. Kind of a medium growing tree. We have one in front of our store that's the second one. The first one got run over. True story. This one right here is Perkins Pink. And I really like the flower on that. The flower is going to be the same on both, it's just the color's a little different. This one right here is big. I would imagine that probably is a good 30 years old. I can tell by the trunk size it's got some diameter to it. Normally around here you're looking at 25, 30 feet high, maybe 20 feet wide. But that's a real nice plant. It's a native that you're not really going to see tons of them out there. That's one of the things I like is if we can start introducing some of these plants that maybe people aren't necessarily going to have in the next year or two, and you can be the first one in your block to have something like this. Now, understory or shade trees, a lot of these can be grown both in the sun and in the shade, okay? What we did was we went through and we picked out some plants that we consider understory trees, but they also can take some sun. Japanese maple, they're a lot happier in a shady or a part sunny area, but they can acclimate themselves to the sun. Once again, I go back to the China Cottage restaurant where they've got one that's facing southwest. So what did we do? We put one right on Far Hills because we want to test it. We want to see how it does. We had Crimson Queen, which is a weeping type. We're going to let it get to be kind of wide. We're going to let it get to be maybe about 8 feet high. But it's one that, the thing you have to remember with the lace leaf varieties, the Japanese maples, is they will scorch in the drought, okay? So if you walk out and you're looking at your plants and all of a sudden you say, wow, something's wrong with my Japanese maple, what could it be? It's in the sun. It may not be anything you've done. It may just be the plant. And it's not that they won't handle the sun, it's just that at times when we go through these 2-month droughts, it might scorch a little bit, okay? Don't be concerned about it. It's not going to kill it. These are ones that in a period of drought, especially ones that are established, because these things are worth a fortune, water it. If we go through a 2-month drought, water it every 10 days. Give it a good soaking. We have these cheap little sprinklers about like this, and I'll tell you what, it has no moving parts. All it does is just spray. It's the best little sprinkler we have, and they never break. But if you throw something like that out there, a lot of these plants, they can really acclimate themselves to sunnier areas, but they'll do best in the shade. This one right here, I think, is a ribbon type. The variegated ones, I'm very, very cautious about putting these in the sun. I just don't think they're quite as sun tolerant as, say, some of the others. It's a nice little plant for a shady area where you want to get a little bit of color. And if you have a backyard, you got a lot of evergreens and maybe it's understory trees. You might want to throw something like that back there to kind of brighten it up a little bit. Typically, the variegated ones will have a little lighter green foliage along with the white, which really kind of brightens the area up. Some of these other varieties, this variety right here is a very compact variety. This tree right here is very old. These don't grow that fast. That's lion's head. And there's many different types of lion head hybrids, okay? There are some that stay a little bit more compact. These are ones that are virtually no maintenance, okay? You really don't have to mess with these too much. The thing with Japanese maples is that they're going to have a decent fall color. And a lot of times, you know, you kind of think of Japanese maple and it has this great, great foliage all season long, and then all of a sudden you look out, wow, that's got a nice fall color. And it might be a little bit lighter. Some of these, like this variety right here, is going to be kind of an orangey yellow. So it's going to have a real nice appearance for a good, you know, bit of the growing season as well as the fall. There's a whole raft of these that, you know, small ones that's, you know, 3 to 4 feet high and wide. I always have trouble with these, some of these botanical names on these. All right, dogwoods. A lot of dogwoods out there. Sun, shade, nice understory tree. This right here, this is the Florida varieties. That's the native varieties. White, pink, red, great fall color, nice red berry. They will take some sun. The ones that, any ones that you see around in this area right in here probably have come from Tennessee. Nobody really grows many dogwoods here, mainly because if you get a really bad winter, they can be killed out. But they're a super hardy tree for certain areas. We sell tons of dogwoods, and we replace very few, and that's one of the things I kind of go by. This one right here, this Kusa variety, you can tell by the shape of the leaf. Kusa varieties was developed by Rutgers University, and they are a little bit more sun tolerant, but they'll handle some shade. Once again, nice berry, nice fall color. We have one that is called Aurora that we put in our one of our flower beds. It faces south. It gets all the southern sun, all the southwest sun. It does great. So we tend to like to experiment with these things to find out how good they'll actually do in the sun. You got pinks, you got variegated ones right here. The variegated ones, I definitely would put those in a little bit more shady of an area. I think that they would perform a little bit better for you. Once again, it's like the Japanese maple, the variegated Japanese maple. It's one that you would put it to an area where it's a little bit more shady and kind of brighten up the area a little bit. Once again, nice reddish maroon fall colors. Red buds. Used to be, this was the only red bud you could find out there. That's just the straight Cercis canadensis. Pinkish blooms, pinkish purple blooms, yellowish fall color, gets decent size. Now all of a sudden they've got a lot more of them. This one right here, this is a rising sun. And this one, from what I understand, is going to be a weeping rising sun as well. Kind of a chartreuse leaf to it. The bloom on it will be similar. I believe it's a little bit more of a whitish bloom, not quite as vivid of a pink. The rising sun is a real nice one, and gives you, for an understory tree, it's going to give you that little splash of color. This one right here, this is kind of a new one, Alley Cat, and that's one that it's got kind of a variegated color to it. The bloom is white on it. It's got a little bit more of a variegation. I think this is one right here would do a little bit better in the shade than it would in the sun. I think something like this right here and these right in here, I think would handle a little bit more sun. But this one right here, the foliage is a little lighter in weight, and I think that it would do a little bit better for you if it was in a little bit more of a shady area. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, all day shade. It could be, you know, a little bit of morning sun, east side of your house, north side of your house, something like that. This one right here, Ruby Falls, that's a great little plant there. It's going to have a purplish foliage, nice purple bloom to it. This one is very, very well developed, as you can see. Normally they come in and there's a bunch of small branches coming out and they're sitting in a pot, and it's one that, you know, you got to have a little bit of patience with because they're not super fast growing. But this one right here is gorgeous, and it gives you that little bit of splash of color. It would handle a little bit more sun. This one right here, Forest Pansy, we've carried it for about 10 years now. I tell you, we don't sell as many of them as I thought we would. I thought when the Canadian cherries stopped being sold around here that we would sell more of these. But this is a real nice plant. This gets to be about 20 feet high. Once again, kind of a purplish bloom to a purplish pink bloom, kind of an intermediate type of growing tree. It'll handle some sun as well. These are just trees that we kind of picked out that will handle some shade, but they'll also handle some sun as well. Hornbeam, definitely don't sell enough of these. It's just a great little tree, medium-sized growing, I love the fall color on these. There's 2 or 3 different types that we carry. There's a columnar one that does really nicely in this area. But hornbeam is a real nice tree. Does not seem to get too many insects or diseases, which that's always a plus. I think that if you're looking for something that will handle a little bit more shade and has a decent medium green color, this would be a good plant for you. It'll also handle some sun. A lot of times what happens in shady areas is that you may end up, if a tree falls, if a tree dies, you might end up with a sunny area. And that's what happens, when we get storms coming through and so forth. So you always want to pick something that maybe will handle a little bit more sun if needed. This is one of my favorite trees right here, white fringe tree. This comes in a bush and a tree. The bloom is absolutely beautiful. It's got kind of a whitish, wispy bloom to it, very fragrant. This comes in single stem as well as multi-stem. I like them both. They can get decent size. You could probably make this into a tall hedge if you wanted to. It would be a little bit more maintenance than what this program is about, but it would do very nicely in this area. I love the bloom on it. I think it's a great bloom. You don't find tons and tons of plants out there that really give you that overwhelming fragrance. This is one of them. And it has a real nice blueberry. One of the things, I'm going to wrap up here in just a second. This year is our 150th anniversary at Siebenthaler's. Not mine personally, but thank you. I will pass that along. The Siebenthaler families, we're on our 6th generation of owners right now. 7th generation is about 5, but I'm sure that they'll be taking over at some point in time. But yes, the company's 150th anniversary is this year, so it's going to be a big year for us. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.